OMG, I've been talking for the solid past like 2 minutes and my mic has been muted. Way to start. Yeah, way for me to start the live stream solid. So we're rolling, yeah. So I was yeah, welcome back everybody. Session six. 6 weeks in, we're kicking ass. Thank you guys for motivating me as much as I hopefully I'm motivating you guys. Quick check in before we get started. Has anyone had any big like interview wins or anything along those lines this past week? Any big wins? I know, yeah, I was still about to say that though. I mean, I still think that's a big accomplishment. That's at least the first step to feeling more confident when you go into the actual ones, You're at least on the right path. Well, hopefully we're fixing that now with all the work I got you doing. Heck yeah, yeah, that's what I like to. And yeah, if you guys ever see me or anyone else in the channel, and most of the time I'm just coding along, feel free to jump in and hang out while we code. Yeah, so tonight is definitely one that I've kind of been looking forward to as we keep encroaching it more into, databases and data modeling, SQLs and things like that. Just, front end, back end, and putting it all together. Um, this is going to be one of those topics that quietly separates developers who can build from, developers who can, also design. There's a difference, and we're definitely going to talk about both of those. Um, we're covering databases, specifically how to actually think about them, not just how do I query Mongo database, but how do you design a schema from scratch, and how do you make the trade-off decisions, and also how do you talk about this stuff when someone asks you in an interview. So we're just going to dive right in, starting with data modeling. Let's see. Um, so we're going to start with the big question, what even is data modeling? The honest answer is most boot camps skip, and I feel like ours kind of did as well. Is data modeling is the process of deciding what your data looks like before you write a single line of code. Um, it's asking you, uh, it's asking what are the things in my string system, what do they look like, and how do they relate to each other. Most of us, myself included, when I was starting out, skip this step entirely. I feel like when we were going through the boot camp, reading a lot of those theory pages back to back to back, it just doesn't fully sink in. Uh, you open up the Mongoose database compass, or you just start writing Mongoose schemas because that's what they're telling you to do, and you're not fully understanding why and how to actually relate with it. Um, and as we start to figure it out as we go, and it does work, but for a while until it really doesn't, especially when you're in an interview trying to talk about these things. Um, thinking about the last project that we built, at some point, the data kind of starts to get messy, especially with, like WTR as you start to add more items. Um, you can have like duplicate inflow in multiple places. You're making 5 different queries to get to one page to render. Realize halfway through that you structured something in a way that made it nearly impossible to extend. That is a data modeling problem, and it almost always starts at the beginning, not in the middle. Mm. So the core skill we're building tonight is how do you think about data before we even touch the keyboard? Um, and the simple framework I use is some three basic questions. What are my entities? Like users, orders, products, posts, whatever nouns, our app is going to be using. What does each entity look like? What fields does it have? What types? And how do the entities relate to each other? Does one user have many orders? Does one post have many comments? Does a product belong to many categories? Um, and that's about it. Before you write a single schema, answer those three questions, write them down, draw boxes, arrows, if you have to, and a napkin sketch is of your data relationships will save you hours of refactoring later. Um, it sounds silly, but really having that visual can really make you see something that your mind not have been showing you. Um, Looking at a concrete example, let's see. Say we're building a blog platform. Our entities are users and posts. Users have name and email. A post has a title, body, and date. The relationship, one user can have many posts. One post belongs to one user. And that's the model. Now the question becomes, how do you represent that relationship in Mongo database? Which brings us to the biggest topic of the night, embedded and references, which that will be the next page. But we'll get there. Um, So, okay, this is one that trips people up the most, and it's one that interviewers love to ask us about because it reveals whether we actually understand document databases or whether we're just using Mongo database like it's SQL with curly brackets. Um, in a re in a relational database like Postgres SQL or MySQL or MySQL, relationships are always handled the same way. Foreign keys. You have a users table and a post table, and the post table has a user ID column that points back to the users. Every time, no exceptions. Mongo database doesn't work that way. Mongo gives us a choice. And choices are either a superpower or a foot gun, depending on whether we understand them. Our two options are embedding and referencing. Embedding means that we put the related data inside the same document, whereas referencing means we'll store the data separately and use an ID to connect them, just like a foreign key. So how do you know when to embed and when to reference? The decision rule that I try to use, and this is the answer you should probably give during an interview. Embed when the data is owned. Let me go back to the embed page. Um, Embed when the data is owned by the parent and doesn't exist independently. You almost always need the data together, user profile and their preferences, for example. Um, and the embedded array has a bounded size. It won't grow forever. Um, when to use a reference? The related data could exist independently. The relationship is many to many. The embedded array could grow unbounded. Multiple documents need to point to the same piece of data. So really, you only have to remember the needs of embedded because it's the exact opposite for reference, plus one, right? So to try to slim things down and to make things, a little bit less, and because I know these meetings are always a lot of information being tossed at you guys. Uh, a good classic example of when embedding breaks. Imagine you're building a social platform that you embed every comment inside a post document. At first, that's fine. A post has 10 comments, no problem. But what happens when the post goes viral and gets 50,000 comments? Mongo has 16 megabyte document size limit. You'll hit it, game over. So for comments, you almost always reference. On the Warhorn project that I'm building and having someone help me with, the Guild event scheduling app, um, we have to think about when it comes to in terms of like events and signups. Events are central to the app, but signups can grow significantly as they need to be queried independently. Referenced makes way more sense here. Whereas on, WTWR, user clothing items are pretty tightly coupled to the user and have a reasonable upper bound. So embedding works on that project. The point is, there's no universal right answer when you code, and this isn't an exception. It depends on your app's access patterns, and that's the gist of it. Um, any questions really on embedding or reference documents? Hell yeah. So yeah, we'll move on to indexing. The thing that nobody really teaches us. Um, Indexing, this is one of the things that makes us look like a senior dev in an interview, especially coming right out of a boot camp, because most of us haven't really touched it. Um, the thing about databases is by default, when you run a query, the database has to look at every single document to find what you're asking for. If you have 100 documents, fine, but if you have 100,000 documents, that query is going to be slow. If you have 10 million documents, your app is going to time out and users are going to leave. Excuse me. And an index solves this. An index is like the index in the back of a textbook. Instead of reading every page to find where authentication is mentioned, you flip to the index. It tells you exactly which page to go to, and that's it. In Mongo database, you can create an index on a field, and the database maintains a separate sorted data structure that lets you jump directly to the documents you're looking for instead of scanning everything. That second one, the second one that we have is a compound index. It covers queries that filter by user ID and by sort and sort by date. Goddamn, tongue twister. Which is super common pattern. Give me like all the posts by this user, most recent first. Or if for all my World of Warcraft nerds out there, you're in the auction house and you want to see the lowest price, items instead of the most expensive. Um, and uh, when do you want to add indexes? The rule of thumb: any field you query by frequency, index it. Any field you sort by, index. Foreign key fields like user ID, almost always index those. Um, when you should not add indexes because you don't want to index everything. Indexes have a cost. Every write operation, insert, update, delete, has to update all the indexes too. So if you're on a write heavy app, too many indexes can slow the things down. Um, your most common interview question on this: your app is slow. How do you diagnose it? Your answer should involve something along the lines of, um, explain Mongo's query analysis tool. You could run like database.collection.find, whatever it is you're looking for, dot 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 explain, um, with whatever else you need to in there. And it's going to tell you whether your query is doing a col scan, collection scan, bad reading everything, that sort of thing, or IX scan, index scan. Um, good, using your index. If you see a call scan on a large collection, you need an index. Um, it's just telling you that it's reading everything. You have a lot of documents. You need to find a way to structure this better so we can scan through things a lot more efficiently. Um, that kind of answer makes interviewers go, okay, this person actually thought about, the production system, or they've taken time to at least look into it and, understand, how things are happening. Anything before we move to SQL? Heard. Um, so we'll hit SQL. Something we'll get literally asked in every single interview. What is SQL versus NoSQL, otherwise known as SQL? Use uh, when do you use which? And when do you give and what? Let me drink some water. I am tongue twister in here. I do. Benjamin was a little rough on me today. Um, so the real answer is not the it depends. Not that sort of answer. We're going to be pretty clear about these. SQL databases like Postgres, MySQL, SQLite, they store data in tables with rows and columns. The schema, the structure, it's defined up front and enforced strictly. Every row in a table has to match the table's structure. Relationships are handled with foreign keys. The query has you query with SQL. Now, in terms of no SQL databases like Mongo, Redis, and Dynamo. They come in several flavors. They document stores, key value stores, graph databases, etc. Mongo is a document store. Data is stored on a JSON-like file or document. The schema is flexible. Two documents in the same collection don't have the same fields. You query with the database's own API. In Mongo's case, it's query language or Mongoose. Um, so, when do you use SQL versus no SQL? Use SQL when your data is highly structured and relational, lots of tables that reference each other with complex joins, sorry. Data integrity is critical, like financial systems, medical records, anything where you need strict constraints and ACID transits. And your schema is relatively stable and unlikely to change dramatically. Um, when to use NoSQL? Your data is document shaped. Each item is self-contained, bundled of info like users, products, posts. You're iterating quickly, and your schema is literally likely to evolve. You're building on a merge stack and want everything in JavaScript or JSON, or you need to scale horizontally at some point. A Mongo database hands this more naturally. So the real talk of it all, for the kinds of apps that we build, merge stack web apps, portfolios, full stack bootcamp projects, Mongo database is almost always fine. The reason it gets a bad reputation sometimes is because people can misuse it. They don't monitor their data thoughtfully. They don't add indexes. They treat it like it's a junk drawer, um, and that's not um, and that's not really a Mongo problem. That's just a modeling problem. So if you ever end up working on something with truly complex rational data, inventory systems, accounting software, healthcare platforms, SQL is probably a better fit. Postgres specifically is extremely well regarded. Um, a good, honest answer in interviews, I'd evaluate the data process patterns and relationship complexity. If the data is naturally document shaped and we're optimizing uh, for iteration speed, I'd lean no SQL. If we have complex relationships that need strict consistency, I lean SQL. In practice, both can handle most use cases well. That's a real answer and not a dodge. So I think, if you are asked, anything on SQL, that could be a great one. Um, Common mistakes. So we're going to close out the technical content with what I guess we call the I've made one, I've made every single one of these list. I think Zaya can attest to it. I've seen her start to come across some issues that I still make myself, or I've seen myself, and I've just beat my head against a wall until I learned my lesson. And so I think these hit home for every one of us. Some some common data modeling mistakes and how not to make them. Um, Not modeling at all, just jumping straight into code. We talked about this at the very top. Three questions first: entities, fields, relationships. Even 10 minutes of upfront thinking can save hours of refactoring here. Mistake two, embedding everything in Mongo database because it's a document database. Or that's because that's what my boot camp taught me. Instead of learning to, how to branch out and learn, different types of databases. Just because you can embed doesn't mean you always should. You want to think about the growth of your apps, think about whether data needs to be accessed independently, and think about, of course, that 16 megabyte limit in Mongo. Um, Mistake three, referencing everything in Mongo database because that's what I want. That's what I know from SQL. You know, the flip side is if you're treating Mongo like it's MySQL with JSON, you're missing the point. Embedding is a first-class feature. You use it when it makes sense. Um, Mistake number four, no indexes on query fields. Um, if you're filtering by a field in production, index it, full stop. Check your queries with explain before you ship. That way you can really make sure that everything is where it should be and all your indexes are proper. Um, that stays there. Ignoring schema validation. Mongo is flexible, but doesn't mean you should let anything into your database. Mongo's uh, definitions are your friend. Um, Use required fields, types, min-max values, validate at the modal layer, not just in the front end. And finally, the last one, not thinking about how data will be queried. This is a big one. Schema design is really query design. Your design scheme based on how you're going to read the data. Ask what are the most common things this app needs to show and model for those access patterns. Um, Other than that, you know, some interview prep around the corner. I know in our last session, or in the last section, let's make sure we can actually communicate with, interviewers, because that's what I, feel like a lot of us join these calls for is to, when I'm in an interview, what should I say, or what are the questions that they might ask me, so I can start learning about these things. Um, and so, of course, we're going to go over some of that stuff. Um, like, what's the difference between SQL and NoSQL? Based off of the last, two sections back, does anyone want to try to jump in and answer that, or? Yeah, yeah, go for it. It's very relational, right? Um, so when asked that question, you want to give the structured versus flexible scheme angle. Um, Mention relational versus document model because document model like Mongo on that NoSQL side, whereas on the SQL side everything's a little bit more relational. A little bit more complex. So like when you use SQL, your data is highly structured and relational. So like it has lots of tables that reference each other with like complex joins. So reference relational you know, sort of thing. Um, no, you're not stupid. Not stupid at all. No, I'm just gonna start hitting you guys with the Murloc soundboard. You know I need to get it for mine. Or the link. Hey, listen. Uh, yeah, yeah. Lots of tables that you're joining in a complex manner. Yeah. But you never want to just tell the interviewer like you don't want to be SQL has tables. No SQL don't. Like don't say that. But yeah, so structured versus flexible schema angles and relational versus document modals. Those will be like the two big verse talking points if you get asked those during an interview. And then just a reminder, I'll be posting this reveal thing into the resource tab as well as there's already a mermaid cheat sheet type thing already in there for you guys as well. Um, so how would you model X, you know, like an entity in Mongo database? How would you start to model? Yeah, no worries, man. So yeah, no worries, no worries. I just like to open the floor just in case you guys might have something that I don't. Um, so for this one, you would want to think it out loud. Name your types of entities that you have. Talk about embedded versus reference, and mention why you made those choices. So depending on what type of model they're giving you, try to think about again, what are those three questions? Entities, embed reference, all of the good stuff. Let's see. How do you handle performance issues in a database? Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Indexes dot, that's where you use the explain the explain method. Um, yeah, so it's something that you'll use when joining and working with like complex databases or just databases in general to give you an explanation of that index. So like depending on whatever you're calling, you'll be able to call, the data that's inside of it. So it's really it's query analysis. The answer alone, um, indexes dot explain is essentially query analysis, and that answer alone explains separates us from most junior candidates. And I mean, just from paying attention, it sounds like like you're already picking up on it, man, which is fucking awesome. Um, looking for something through my texts. See if I can find it. Nope. Alrighty, what's the next one? What is a compound index? I know we covered it very quickly. Let's pop over to the index page. Alrighty, it is an index on multiple fields that supports query filtering or sorting by both. Super useful for common access patterns like give me all posts by user, sort by date. So again, that was instead of just indexes, it was like that auction house, that World of Warcraft analogy, being able to filter and being able to see things in a specific way, so you're not having to look through every single item. Um, what's a schema in the context of Mongo? Yeah, take your time. Yeah, yeah, schema. What's a schema in the context of Mongo? So if we're talking about Mongo specifically, what was that? Kinda. So, kinda. So Mongo itself is schemeless, but so Mongo database itself is schemeless, but Mongoose lets you define a schema at the application layer to enforce structure and validation. So practice saying those out loud, not just knowing them, saying it. Mongo itself is schemeless, but Mongoose lets you define a schema at the application layer to enforce structure and validation. Um, yes, I'll try to pull up an exact definition. Let's see. A schema is a defined structure for your data. It describes what fields exist, what types they are, and what rules they follow. So think of it more like a form template. The form defines what fields are available, like name, email, age, what type of input each expects. So almost kind of like, here, let me double check, because I'm pretty sure I'm right, but let me confirm. Yep. So it's almost exactly like an interface that you have on the front end, like when you're coding React or TypeScript or whatever, you know what an interface is, right? So it's just how you're mapping, how you want to map through the template, pretty much. It's just creating a template. A TypeScript interface defines the shape of an object in your code. A Mongo schema defines the shape of a document in your database. Kind of exactly like if you have your data sheet, right? Um, and you're putting in all of the data, it would look exactly like that. You'd have, const variable name equals inside curly brackets, and then, name equals, name semicolon or whatever the two dot word thingy is colon, then that thing, so on, so on. You'd structure it like just like you would specific data. Yeah, yeah, of course. Um, So just to wrap things up for like at least the live stream and the recording, of course I always hang around for a little bit in case anybody else has things they want to share or anything like that. But shortly after, I do have a meeting with my project team. We've been kicking ass and taking names, so we're getting through it. But yeah, um, this was session six, databases and data modeling, scheme design, embedded versus referencing, indexing, SQL, no SQL, some common mistakes, and interview questions. A lot of this stuff is foundational. Every app we build from here on uses a database. The decisions we make in those first scheme plans, design conversations affect the whole project. So now that we have a framework for how to make these decisions intentionally instead of just winging it, I think we are, off to a great start, off on the right foot. Um, Shout out again to everyone who's been showing up consistently. I see you guys. Thank you guys so much for helping me build this and continue to make it grow. And it's not just me talking to myself because I'm still going to do them. Before we close, one more open floor. Any questions about tonight, things that you might be stuck on with your own projects, anything you guys might want to talk through with the group, anything like that? Swag, swag. Well then that's a wrap on session six. I'll be dropping all the links into the Discord and things like that. Next week, stay tuned. I'll have an announcement out soon. Um, you know, Make sure that you guys are posting ideas in the meeting chat if there's anything you would like to hear about. But I have great ideas moving forward, and we're just going to kind of keep things kind of matching with each other as we kind of float along. So yeah, that's about it. So thank you guys.